In a house with 30 years of memories etched into its walls, a woman stands alone at her kitchen window, watching as strangers measure her garden for demolition. The roses she planted with her husband, the ones that marked birthdays, anniversaries, moments that defined a life, are being assessed for removal, their value calculated in square footage rather than sentiment. Her name, once spoken with reverence under this roof, is now whispered like an inconvenience. "Mom, please knock before entering." 5 words that transformed her from matriarch to intruder overnight. She traces her finger along the deed hidden in her pocket, the paper that proves what her heart already knows. This house, paid for with decades of sacrifice, belongs to her alone. They thought her silence was surrender. They mistook her patience for weakness. They never imagined that behind her gentle smile, she was planning not just to defend her home, but to reclaim her dignity. They're about to learn that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has nothing left to lose. The morning light slanted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the granite countertop Margaret Wilson had chosen 15 years earlier. She stood at the edge of her garden, pruning shears in hand, surveying the rose bushes she'd planted with Robert just before he fell ill. 6 varieties, each with its own story: the peace roses for their anniversary, the Mr. Lincolns because Robert loved their scent, the Julia Childs because Margaret thought their butter yellow blooms looked good enough to eat. The dew had barely dried when she gathered a small bouquet, wrapping the stems in a damp paper towel. A weekly ritual: fresh roses for the breakfast table, something that had once made Robert smile over his coffee and crossword puzzle. Margaret made her way back to the house, the familiar path now feeling somehow different under her feet. The side door, the one she'd used thousands of times, didn't swing open at her touch. She tried the handle again, then noticed the small black box mounted beside it, a keypad, digital, sleek, and utterly foreign. When had they installed this? She shifted the roses to her left hand and tried the knob again, more forcefully this time. Locked. Definitely locked. "Mom!" Brian's voice came from the other side of the door, followed by the sound of the lock disengaging. Her son stood there in sweatpants and a Northwestern University t-shirt, coffee mug in hand, looking slightly annoyed. "Why is the door locked?" Margaret asked, stepping inside. "We installed a smart lock system yesterday," Brian said, moving back toward the kitchen where Allison sat at the island, scrolling through her phone. "It's connected to our phones. Much safer." "I see," Margaret said, though she didn't, not really. "And my code, for when I come back from the garden." Allison looked up, her expression professionally pleasant, the same look she gave clients when they asked for changes to their marketing campaigns. "We're still setting up everyone's access. It's a process." "A process," Margaret repeated, placing the roses on the counter and reaching for a vase from the cabinet above the sink. "Not that one," Allison said quickly. "I'm using those for the dinner party this weekend. There's a plastic one under the sink." Margaret paused, her hand still on the cabinet door. The vases had been a wedding gift from her mother. She'd used them for 30 years. "I always use these for the roses," she said quietly. "I know, but I've been planning this tablescape for weeks. I need them for the centerpieces. Just use something else." "Okay." Allison turned back to her phone. "Oh, and the cleaning service is coming today. Could you make sure your things aren't lying around in the common areas?" Common areas? As if the house Margaret had paid off 15 years ago was suddenly a college dormitory with shared spaces. "Of course," Margaret said, her voice tightening. She closed the cabinet and reached under the sink for the plastic pitcher Allison had suggested. It was actually a measuring cup, not even a proper vase. But she said nothing, arranging the roses as best she could before placing them on the small breakfast table in the corner, rather than the island where they'd always gone. Brian hadn't looked up from his phone during the entire exchange. "I'm going to make pancakes for Olivia when she wakes up," Margaret said, opening the refrigerator. "Where did you put the buttermilk?" "Oh," Allison said, finally setting her phone down. "We're not doing dairy for Olivia anymore. I read this fascinating article about inflammation and childhood development. We're trying a cleaner diet for her." "She's 7, Margaret said. "She loves pancakes. She'll love the gluten-free banana ones I make too." Allison countered, "We're just trying to be more health conscious as a family." Margaret wanted to point out that Olivia had never had any health issues, allergies, or sensitivities, that the child thrived on balanced meals and occasional treats, just as Brian had when he was young. Instead, she nodded, replacing the eggs she'd taken out. "I'll just have some coffee then," she said, reaching for a mug. "Great," Allison brightened. "We just got this amazing single-origin Ethiopian blend from that boutique roaster downtown. It's in the blue canister." Margaret looked at the lineup of matching containers on the counter, none of which contained the simple Folgers she preferred. She selected the blue one, removed the lid, and was hit with the scent of heavily flavored coffee. It has notes of blueberry and chocolate, Allison explained, watching Margaret's face. Much better than that grocery store stuff you used to buy. Better was subjective, Margaret thought, but she filled her mug anyway, adding cream from a tiny porcelain pitcher that had replaced her familiar carton. The coffee was acidic and complex in a way she didn't enjoy, but she smiled and complimented it anyway. It was easier than explaining that after 65 years. She knew what she liked. Olivia appeared in the doorway then, hair tousled from sleep, still in her space-themed pajamas. Grandma, she said, brightening when she saw Margaret, did you make pancakes? Before Margaret could answer, Allison stepped in. Not today, sweetie. We're trying some new breakfast options. Remember, I'm going to make you those special banana pancakes I told you about. Olivia's face fell slightly. But it's Saturday. Grandma always makes pancakes on Saturday. Well, things change, Allison said briskly. Now go wash your hands and face before breakfast. Margaret watched her granddaughter trudge off to the bathroom, shoulders slumped. She took another sip of the too complex coffee and said nothing, even as something sharp twisted inside her chest. When had her family's home become a place where traditions were discarded so easily, where roses went into measuring cups and pancakes became contraband? The garden had always been Margaret's sanctuary. After Robert died, she'd spent entire days there, her hands in the soil, connecting with something permanent when everything else felt temporary. The roses, the herb garden, the small vegetable patch, they were more than plants. They were continuity, which is why the sound of machinery coming from the backyard that Tuesday morning sent her rushing outside in her slippers and robe. Two men in work clothes were operating a small excavator near her rose garden. The peace roses were already gone, a hole in the ground where they'd stood for 12 years. The Mr. Lincolns were next, their crimson blooms shuddering as the machine approached. Stop! Margaret shouted, rushing toward them. What are you doing? The workers paused, looking confused. One of them checked a piece of paper in his pocket. Ma'am, we're putting in the play structure, he explained. We have a work order. What play structure? This is my rose garden. Mom. Brian appeared from the house, dressed for his remote workday in a button-down shirt and jeans. What's going on? They're destroying my roses, Margaret said, gesturing to the already displaced plants. Did you know about this? Brian had the decency to look uncomfortable. Ah, yes. Allison ordered a modern play set for Olivia. Top of the line. It needs a flat, clear area. So you chose my rose garden without even asking me. Well, technically it's our backyard, he said, lowering his voice. And Olivia needs a place to play that's safe and modern. Those rose thorns could be dangerous. Margaret stared at her son, struggling to process what she was hearing. I've had these roses for over a decade. They're special varieties that Robert and I planted together. I know, Mom, and we appreciate all you've done with the garden, but we need to make some updates for Olivia's development. Allison has been researching outdoor play environments for months. Updates. Margaret felt her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. You're not updating. Brian, you're erasing. Don't be dramatic, Brian said, his tone sharpening. They're just plants. We can buy you new ones to put around the edges of the yard. Just plants, Margaret repeated, tears threatening. Your father helped me plant these roses. The yellow ones were our anniversary gift to each other the year before he died. Brian sighed, glancing back at the house where Allison had appeared in the doorway. Arms crossed. Mom, I understand you're upset, but this decision has been made. The workers are here. We've paid a deposit, and Olivia needs this play space. We can talk about replanting some roses elsewhere. Okay. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But Margaret recognized the set of her son's jaw, the same expression Robert had worn when his mind was made up. She looked past him to Allison, who was watching the scene with thinly veiled impatience. Fine, Margaret said finally, her voice quiet. But I'd like to dig up the remaining bushes and try to save them. The guys can do that, Brian said, already turning away. They'll put them aside for you. No, Margaret insisted. I'll do it myself. They're delicate. Brian shrugged. Whatever you want. Just don't get in the workers' way. They're on a tight schedule. Margaret spent the next hour carefully digging up her beloved roses, her slippers caked with mud, tears occasionally slipping down her cheeks as she worked. Not a single member of the household came to help her. When Allison finally emerged, It was only to direct the workers about the precise placement of the modernist play structure, a stark arrangement of metal and recycled plastic that looked more like a museum installation than a child's playground. Later, as Margaret potted the salvaged roses in temporary containers on the small porch of the guest house, Helen Rhodes pulled into the driveway. Her oldest friend took one look at Margaret still in her dirt-smeared robe, surrounded by uprooted roses, and knew something was wrong. Garden renovation? Helen asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it wasn't Margaret's choice. Surprise playground installation, Margaret replied, wiping her hands on a towel. Apparently, my roses were a safety hazard. Helen, never one to mince words even before her decades as a family lawyer, raised an eyebrow. Let me guess Allison's idea. Who else? Margaret sighed. Brian says it's for Olivia's development. And they didn't think to discuss it with you first in your own garden. Margaret shrugged, trying to appear more nonchalant than she felt. Apparently, it's not my garden anymore. It's the family backyard. Helen's expression darkened. That's concerning. Maggie, first the locked doors, now this. They're systematically pushing you out of your own spaces. They're not pushing me out, Margaret protested, though her voice lacked conviction. They're just making changes. Changes they don't consult you about. In a house you own. Helen crossed her arms. Have you checked your deed recently, made sure everything's still in your name? Helen Margaret looked shocked. Brian would never. People do things they would never do all the time when money and property are involved. Helen said, even good people, even family. You're being paranoid, Margaret said, but something cold had settled in her stomach. I'm being realistic. 25 years as a family lawyer teaches you to expect the unexpected, especially when adult children move back home. Helen softened her tone. Just check the paperwork, Maggie, for my peace of mind, if nothing else. Margaret promised she would, mostly to appease her friend, but after Helen left, the suggestion lingered like a persistent shadow. Surely Brian wouldn't do anything underhanded with the house. He was her son, Robert's boy. He might be making inconsiderate decisions, but legal manipulation, that was a bridge too far, wasn't it? The bathroom incident happened 3 weeks later. Margaret was stepping out of the shower in the main house, her shower, in the master bathroom she'd used for 30 years, when her foot slipped on the tile. She managed to grab the towel rack, but it pulled loose from the wall, leaving her to catch herself awkwardly against the vanity. Nothing was broken, but her hip and shoulder blossomed with bruises, and her pride suffered a more significant blow. Brian found her sitting on the edge of the tub, clutching a towel around herself, trying to catch her breath. Mom, are you okay? He asked, helping her up. I'm fine, she insisted. The towel rack came loose. I've been meaning to tighten it. Brian frowned, examining the detached rack. This is why we need to talk about your living arrangements. This bathroom isn't safe for someone your age. Margaret bristled. Someone my age? I'm 65, not 90. And there's nothing wrong with the bathroom. The rack just needs to be screwed back in. Still, Brian persisted, you'd be much safer in the guest house full time. It's all on one level, no steps to navigate, and we could install those safety bars in the shower. I don't need safety bars, Margaret said firmly. I need people to stop treating me like I'm decrepit. This is my bathroom, in my house. Brian's expression shifted to something conciliatory, but firm, the same look he'd given her when explaining why she shouldn't drive at night anymore, or why her old cast-iron pans had been replaced with lightweight nonstick versions. Mom, you know Allison and I appreciate everything you've done for us, letting us move back after the downsizing at my company. But the reality is, this house is big, and maintaining it all is a lot for you. The guest house is the perfect solution. You get privacy, we handle the maintenance, and everyone stays safe. I don't need privacy, Margaret countered. I need respect in my own home. It's our home now, Mom, Brian said softly. We're raising Olivia here. We need to make it work for all of us. Our home. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. When had her home, the one she and Robert had scrimped and saved for, the one they'd paid off before his death, become our home, in a way that somehow excluded her? Just think about it. Brian continued, already turning to leave. I'll fix the towel rack this weekend. But the towel rack remained unrepaired for 2 weeks. When Margaret mentioned it again, Allison smiled brightly and said, Oh, don't worry about that bathroom anymore. We've decided to remodel it completely. Brian's already talking to contractors. You should use the guest house bathroom in the meantime. It's so much safer for you. Gradually, inevitably, Margaret found more of her belongings migrating to the guest house. Her favorite reading chair was moved there because Allison needed the space for her home office. Her cookbooks were boxed up because the kitchen was being streamlined. Even her photographs, the ones of Robert in his Navy uniform, of baby Brian, of her parents, were taken from the living room walls to make way for Allison's curated collection of modern art. With each small change, each tiny territorial claim, Margaret felt herself fading from the main house like a ghost that hadn't yet realized it was dead. The cafe was busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Margaret sat across from Helen at their usual table, stirring her tea absently while raindrops raced down the window beside them. I feel ridiculous even saying this out loud, Margaret confessed, but sometimes I wonder if they're trying to erase me from the house entirely. Helen didn't immediately dismiss the concern, which Margaret found both validating and terrifying. Have you looked for those property documents yet? Helen asked instead. Margaret sighed. I started to, but then Allison reorganized my filing cabinet to make room for her scrapbooking supplies. I can't find anything now. That's convenient, Helen said, her tone carefully neutral. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just noting patterns. Helen leaned forward. Your son and daughter-in-law move into your paid-off home during a temporary financial setback, gradually restrict your access to various parts of the house, relocate your belongings, and somehow your important documents go missing during a reorganization. Meanwhile, they're remodeling bathrooms and installing expensive playground equipment. Put like that, it did sound alarming. Brian would never try to take my house, Margaret insisted, though with less conviction than before. He's just accommodating Allison's vision for their family home. Their family home, Helen repeated pointedly. Maggie, when was the last time you checked your bank statements, your investment accounts? Margaret blinked. I have automatic deposits for my pension and Social Security. The bills are on auto pay. I haven't really needed to check. And who set up those auto pays? Brian helped me after Robert died. He's always been good with financial matters. Helen's expression grew more concerned. Does Brian have access to your accounts? Power of attorney? Anything like that? Well, yes, he's on some of the accounts as an authorized user for emergencies, and he has financial power of attorney. But that's just practical. If something happened to me, something is happening to you, Helen interrupted gently. You're being systematically marginalized in your own home, and I'm worried about why. She reached across the table and squeezed Margaret's hand. I know you don't want to think the worst of Brian, and maybe there's an innocent explanation. But please, as your friend who's seen too many elderly clients get taken advantage of by well-meaning family members, check your accounts. Make sure everything is as it should be. Margaret promised she would, this time with genuine intent. The conversation had stirred an uneasiness she couldn't ignore, especially when she considered the expensive renovations and additions appearing around the house. Brian's company had downsized, and Allison's marketing business was still finding its footing. Where was the money coming from? As if reading her thoughts, Helen added. And maybe check your credit report, too, just to be safe. The home office had once been Robert's domain, a warm space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a solid oak desk, and the faint smell of his pipe tobacco that lingered years after he quit smoking. Now it was Allison's creative headquarters, all white furniture and motivational posters, with a dedicated corner for her social media equipment. Margaret hesitated at the doorway. She rarely entered this room anymore, partly out of respect for Allison's workspace, but mostly because it hurt to see Robert's sanctuary transformed into something unrecognizable. But Helen's concerns had gnawed at her for days, and the file cabinet with their important documents still stood in the corner, even if its contents had been reorganized. The house was quiet. Brian had taken Olivia to her Saturday morning swim lessons, and Allison was at a marketing retreat for the weekend. It was the perfect opportunity to do some investigating without being interrupted or questioned. Margaret slipped into the office and went straight to the filing cabinet. The drawers slid open smoothly, revealing color-coded folders with Allison's precise labeling. Margaret flipped through them quickly. Brand partnerships, content calendars, influencer contacts, nothing remotely related to household documents. She tried the next drawer, Olivia School, Olivia Activities, Olivia Medical. At least these made sense for a family filing system, but they still weren't what she was looking for. The bottom drawer was locked. Margaret frowned. Why would one drawer be locked when the others weren't? She tried pulling harder, but it didn't budge. She straightened, looking around the room for where a key might be hidden, when her eyes fell on Brian's laptop, open on the desk. It wasn't like her to snoop, but something about that locked drawer had triggered an alarm bell she couldn't silence. She moved to the desk and jiggled the mouse. The screen lit up, requesting a password. Of course, but then she noticed a yellow sticky note tucked under the keyboard. New password, Olivia 2017. Typical Brian. always writing down his passwords despite her warnings about security. Margaret hesitated only briefly before typing in the password. The screen unlocked, revealing Brian's desktop with its neatly arranged icons. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for, but opened his email first, scanning recent messages. Most were work-related or personal correspondence that didn't concern her. She was about to close the window, feeling guilty for invading his privacy, when a subject line caught her eye. Refinance approval, 247 Maple Street. Her address, heart pounding. Margaret clicked on the email. It was from a loan officer at First National Bank, confirming approval of a home equity line of credit for $150,000 against the property at 247 Maple Street. The email congratulated Brian on the approval and mentioned that the funds would be disbursed as requested once the final paperwork was signed. Refinance HELOC. Margaret had paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. There was no loan to refinance, and she certainly hadn't applied for a home equity line of credit. With shaking hands, she clicked through to the earlier emails in the chain. There it was, an application for a HELOC in her name, with her electronic signature at the bottom. An electronic signature she had never provided. Margaret felt physically ill. She continued searching, opening folders on Brian's desktop until she found one labeled Wilson Family Finances. Inside were PDFs of bank statements, her bank statements along with investment account summaries and retirement fund documents. She opened the most recent bank statement and stared in disbelief at the balance, 324178. That couldn't be right. Her retirement account should have over $200,000, the result of Robert's careful planning and her own frugal habits. She opened another statement from 6 months earlier, 189 45732, and another from 3 months ago, 47 892.16. The room seemed to tilt around her. Someone had been withdrawing large sums from her retirement account, and it wasn't her. A notification popped up on the screen, a new email from Allison with the subject line, Reinvestor Meeting Confirmed. Against her better judgment, Margaret opened it. Brian. Great news, Davidson is bringing his investors to see the property next Thursday at 2 p.m. They're very excited about the potential for the lot, especially with the zoning changes coming through. If all goes well, we could have an offer by the end of the month. I've attached the renderings for the development they're proposing. 6 luxury townhomes where the main house is now, with preserved green space, your mom's precious garden. As a selling point. The guest house would become the model unit initially, then converted to the property management office. Just make sure your mom is out of the house for the meeting. Maybe schedule that doctor's appointment we discussed, the one about evaluating her living options. We're so close, babe. Just a few more weeks of playing nice, and we'll finally be free to move forward with our lives. Love you, Allison P.S. Did you get the Harmony Pines brochure I left for her? Senior living is really the best option for everyone, especially with her little accident in the bathroom. Perfect timing. Right attached to the email were architectural renderings showing Margaret's beloved home demolished, replaced by modern townhouses with sleek lines and minimalist landscaping. The mature oak tree Robert had planted when they moved in gone. The garden where she'd spent countless hours paved over for a communal patio. And the guest house, her increasingly mandatory residence, repurposed into an office. They were planning to sell her home out from under her, not just planning, actively meeting with investors, creating renderings, making arrangements, and worse, they were considering putting her in a senior living facility, using her minor fall as justification. Margaret closed the email and sat very still, trying to process the betrayal. The son she'd raised, the boy who'd cried in her arms when his father died, was secretly taking out loans against her home, draining her retirement accounts, and planning to sell the property without her knowledge or consent. And his wife, the woman who smiled brightly while suggesting Margaret use plastic vases for her roses, was orchestrating the whole thing. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted her back to the present. Brian and Olivia returning from swim lessons. Quickly, Margaret closed all the windows she'd opened on the laptop, returned it to its original state, and hurried out of the office. She needed to find those property documents, and she needed to call Helen. Immediately. The storage unit smelled of dust and forgotten things. Margaret hadn't been here since Robert died, when she'd carefully packed away the items that were too painful to keep in the house, but too precious to discard. Brian had handled the payments all these years. Another helpful gesture she now viewed with suspicion. Helen stood beside her, flashlight in hand, scanning the stacked boxes. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked. "Robert's fireproof box," Margaret replied, moving deeper into the unit. "He kept all our important documents in it: deed, insurance policies, his will, investment information. I thought Brian had brought it to the house after the funeral, but it wasn't with the other files." And you're sure it would be here? It has to be. Robert was meticulous about documents. Margaret began shifting boxes, checking labels written in her husband's precise handwriting, Christmas decorations, Navy memorabilia, photo albums, 1970, 1985. Finally, in the back corner, behind a stack of old suitcases, she found a large plastic bin labeled Robert Personal. Here, she said, pulling it forward, help me open this. Together, they pried off the lid, revealing Robert's carefully packed belongings, his dress uniform, the watch his father had given him, photo albums from his naval service, and beneath it all, a rectangular metal box with a combination lock. That's it, Margaret breathed, lifting it out. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the combination their wedding anniversary and Olivia's birth year. The lock clicked open, inside, organized with Robert's characteristic precision, were their most important documents. Margaret rifled through them quickly, pulling out the deed to the house. Here it is, she said, unfolding the paper with care. Her eyes went straight to the ownership section, and a wave of relief washed over her. It's still in my name, only my name. Helen took the document, examining it carefully. Yes, this is the original deed from when you purchased the house, but we should check if there have been any changes filed with the county, any amendments, liens, or new claims on the title. How would they do that without my signature? Margaret asked. Helen's expression was grim. The same way they apparently got your signature on that HELOC application electronically. It's fraud, but it happens, especially when family members have access to personal information. Margaret continued sorting through the box, finding insurance policies, Robert's will, and finally, an envelope she didn't recognize. It was sealed, with Robert's handwriting across the front, for Margaret open only in case of emergency. Her hands shook as she carefully broke the seal and removed several documents. The first was a letter in Robert's handwriting, dated just months before his death. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, it means you're facing a situation I hoped would never arise. I've always trusted Brian, but I've seen too many families torn apart by money and property to leave things to chance. When we first bought our home, I insisted it be in your name only. I've maintained that arrangement through the years, despite opportunities to refinance or add Brian as we got older. This wasn't lack of trust, but protection for you, and for him too, keeping him from temptation. What you don't know is that I also established a private trust in your name. The details are in the enclosed documents, but the key points: it contains nearly $1 million for my life insurance and investments, managed separately from our regular accounts. Only you can access it, not Brian, not anyone else. I set it up this way because I know how generous you are, how you would give everything to help our son. But sometimes help isn't really help, and giving isn't really love. Sometimes the most loving thing is to say no. If you're reading this letter, it means you've encountered a situation where that lesson has become painfully clear. I'm sorry I'm not there to stand with you through it, but you're stronger than you know, Margaret. And this trust gives you options and independence no matter what has happened. All my love, always. Margaret stared at the letter, tears blurring her vision. Even from beyond the grave, Robert was still protecting her, still anticipating problems she couldn't have imagined. She passed the letter to Helen, who read it quickly, her expression shifting from concern to something like triumph. That clever, wonderful man, Helen said. He created a financial safety net completely separate from your other assets. I had no idea, Margaret whispered, examining the trust documents. All these years, I thought our retirement accounts and the house were everything. Robert obviously worried that something like this might happen someday, Helen said, and he made sure you'd be protected. Margaret nodded, still processing the revelation. What do I do now? Confront Brian, call the police. First, we secure this trust, Helen said decisively. Make sure Brian has no way to access it. Then we need to document everything: the fraudulent loan, the withdrawals from your retirement accounts, these investor meetings they're planning. And then, Helen's smile was sharp, reminiscent of her courtroom days. Then we set a trap, because if they want to play games with your house, they're about to learn they've chosen the wrong opponent. Margaret couldn't sleep that night. Every creak in the guest house, her de facto residence, now made her flinch, wondering if it was Brian coming to check if she'd discovered their plans. The metal box sat hidden under her bed, its contents both comforting and disturbing. Robert had known. Somehow, he'd anticipated that their son might one day view her as an obstacle rather than a mother. The thought broke her heart, but it also steeled her resolve. If Robert had seen the potential for this betrayal, there must have been signs even then, signs she'd been too trusting to notice. Around midnight, her phone chimed with a text. It was from Samuel Green, her neighbor and friend for the past 20 years. Margaret, Sorry to text so late. Noticed unusual activity at your house today. A group of men in suits walking the property with Brian and Allison while you were out. They were measuring and taking photos. Seemed odd. Thought you should know. Sam, the investors. They'd scheduled the meeting earlier than the email had indicated, perhaps hoping to complete their business before Margaret caught on. She texted back a quick thank you to Samuel, promising to explain later. Her mind raced. She needed to act faster than she'd planned. Tomorrow, she would call the bank about the fraudulent loan. She would contact her financial advisor about the missing retirement funds. She would begin the process of securing the house that had always been hers. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve for the son who had chosen greed over love, for the relationship that might never recover, and for Robert, who had seen it all coming but hadn't lived long enough to help her face it. The tears came hot and fast, soaking her pillow as she curled around her pain like a wounded animal. When the storm finally passed, Margaret Wilson lay awake in the dark, her grief hardening into something new and unfamiliar resolve. They had underestimated her badly, and they were about to discover their mistake. Olivia found the brochure while helping Margaret sort through a box of old photographs. It had been tucked between Margaret's nightstand and the wall in the guest house, partially hidden but not completely out of sight, almost as if someone had wanted her to find it eventually. Grandma, what's Harmony Pines? Olivia asked, flipping through the glossy pages. Margaret glanced over, her heart sinking when she saw the lavender and teal brochure in her granddaughter's hands. Let me see that, sweetheart. The marketing materials were high-end and carefully crafted smiling seniors playing golf, elegant dining rooms with white tablecloths, nurses hovering attentively in the background. Luxury senior living, the cover proclaimed, independence with support. Inside, someone, Allison, undoubtedly had placed sticky notes on specific pages. This one has a garden club on the activities page. Look at these beautiful apartment layouts beside floor plans of tiny one-bedroom units. And most disturbing, we've already paid the waiting list deposit next to the pricing information. They'd already paid a deposit without discussing it with her, without even mentioning it as a possibility. Is this a hotel? Olivia asked innocently. Margaret forced a smile. Something like that. For older people? Like you. Olivia's forehead creased. Are you going to live there instead of with us? The genuine concern in her granddaughter's voice nearly broke Margaret's composure. No, sweetheart. I'm not planning to move anywhere. Good. Olivia leaned against her, small arms wrapping around Margaret's waist. I don't want you to go away. Daddy and Mommy argue when they think I can't hear. They say the house is too big and old, but I like it, especially when you're here. Margaret stroked the child's hair, her mind working rapidly. What else do they say when they think you can't hear? Olivia shrugged. Boring grown-up stuff? About money and investors and something called equity. She hesitated. And sometimes about you. Mommy says you're... She lowered her voice to a whisper, clearly repeating something she'd overheard. Standing in the way of their future. That sounds mean, but Daddy says they're just trying to help you because you're getting older. Getting older. As if 65 was ancient, as if she needed their help with decisions about her own home and life. Do they talk about the house a lot? Margaret pressed gently. Olivia nodded. Mommy shows Daddy pictures on her computer. New houses they want to build where ours is. She says they'll be rich and can move to a better neighborhood. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Margaret's remaining doubts. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an exaggeration of her fears. This was a deliberate, calculated plan to push her out of her home and profit from its sale. Olivia, Margaret said carefully, would you do something important for me? Something secret, just between us? The girl's eyes widened. Like spies. Something like that. Margaret went to her dresser and removed a small digital voice recorder, a gift from Robert years ago that she'd never had much use for until now. She showed Olivia how to operate it. If you hear Mommy and Daddy talking about the house, or about me, or about Harmony Pines, can you press this button to record what they say? It's not to get them in trouble, she added quickly, seeing Olivia's uncertainty. It's to help me understand what's happening. It wasn't fair to involve a child in adult problems. Margaret knew that. But she also knew that Olivia was already involved, already overhearing conversations she shouldn't, already sensing the tension in the household. And Margaret needed evidence beyond what she glimpsed on Brian's computer. Olivia studied the recorder, then nodded solemnly. I can do that. But why don't you just ask them out of the mouths of babes? Margaret sighed. Sometimes grown-ups don't tell the whole truth, even when you ask them directly. Like when Daddy says he's not mad, but his face is all red. Despite everything, Margaret laughed. Exactly like that. Olivia slipped the recorder into her pocket, suddenly looking older than her 7 years. I'll help you. Grandma, I don't want you to go away. I don't want to go away either, Margaret said, hugging her close. And I won't, I promise. The bank manager looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the documents Margaret had brought. Helen sat beside her, her presence both moral support and legal intimidation. Mrs. Wilson, the manager said finally, these appear to be legitimate loan documents with your electronic signature. The funds have already been disbursed to your account. It's fraud, Margaret said firmly. I never applied for this loan. I never authorized anyone to use my home as collateral, and I certainly never received $150,000. The funds were deposited directly into your joint account with your son, the manager explained, turning his computer screen to show her the transaction. An account I haven't used in years, Margaret countered. Brian manages that account, supposedly for household expenses. I have my own separate accounts for my personal finances. Helen leaned forward. Mr. Patterson, my client is telling you that she did not authorize this loan. Her signature was used without her consent, likely by her son, who had access to her personal information. That's fraud, and the bank has a responsibility to investigate. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. These are serious allegations against a family member. They are, Margaret interrupted, and I don't make them lightly. But the evidence is clear. I'd like to file a formal fraud claim and freeze any further disbursements from this account immediately. And, Helen added, we'll need all records related to this transaction. Every document, every communication, every note in your system about who requested this loan and how it was processed. The manager hesitated, then nodded. I'll need to involve our fraud department and legal team. This will take time to investigate. How much time? Margaret asked. Weeks, possibly months. Helen's expression hardened. That's not acceptable. My client's home has been used as collateral for a fraudulent loan. Every day this continues is another day. Her property is at risk. I understand your concern, but we have procedures. We understand procedures. Helen cut in. We also understand liability. If this bank fails to act promptly on a credible fraud claim and my client suffers financial harm as a result, the potential damages could be significant. The implied threat hung in the air. Patterson cleared his throat. I'll expedite the investigation, he said. In the meantime, I can place a temporary freeze on the account where the funds were deposited. Would that help? It's a start, Margaret said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you. As they left the bank, Helen squeezed Margaret's arm. Phase 1 complete. Now we need to secure your retirement accounts before they drain anything else. And then, Margaret asked, then we confront the real estate angle, Helen said grimly. Because if they're already meeting with investors, they're further along in their plans than we thought. Margaret nodded, feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. She'd spent the morning officially reporting her own son for fraud. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done, harder even than burying Robert. But beneath the pain was a curious sense of liberation. She was fighting back. She was reclaiming her life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brian Mom. Why is the joint account frozen? Trying to pay contractors. Call me ASAP. Margaret slipped the phone back into her purse without responding. Let him wonder. Let him worry. It was time Brian felt some of the uncertainty she'd been living with. Ready for the next stop? Helen asked, gesturing toward her car. Margaret straightened her shoulders. More than ready. Brian was waiting when Margaret returned to the house that afternoon, his expression a mixture of anger and panic. Allison hovered behind him in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed defensively. Mom, what the hell is going on? Brian demanded. The bank says you've frozen our account and filed some kind of fraud claim. Margaret set her purse down calmly. Yes, that's correct. Are you serious? That's our household account? No, Brian, it's my account that you have access to. And someone used it to deposit $150,000 from a home equity loan I never applied for, using my house as collateral without my permission. Brian's face flushed. That's ridiculous. We discussed this. You agreed to the loan for the renovations. Did I? Margaret's voice was steady. When exactly did we have this conversation? Because I have no memory of agreeing to borrow $150,000 against my paid-off home. You're getting confused again, Allison interjected, stepping forward. This is exactly why we've been concerned about your living situation. Your memory hasn't been reliable lately. The gaslighting was so blatant that Margaret almost laughed. My memory is perfectly fine, Allison, and it doesn't take much memory to know I never signed loan documents for $150,000. You signed electronically? Brian insisted. I helped you with it. More lies, Margaret said, her calm finally slipping. You forged my signature, took out a loan against my home without my consent, and have been systematically pushing me out of my own house. And for what? So you could sell it to developers and build luxury townhomes? The color drained from both their faces. Allison recovered first. Who have you been talking to? She demanded. Has someone been filling your head with conspiracy theories? Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. From it, she extracted printouts of the emails she'd found on Brian's computer, the architectural renderings of the proposed development, and the brochure for Harmony Pines with Allison's sticky notes still attached. No conspiracy theories, she said, just evidence. You've been planning to sell my home out from under me and move me into assisted living. You've drained my retirement accounts, yes. I've checked those too and taken out a fraudulent loan against my property. Brian stared at the documents, his face ashen. Mom, I can explain. I'm sure you can, Margaret interrupted. You can explain how you were just trying to help me, how I'm getting older and need assistance managing my affairs, how the house is too big for me and you're just looking out for my best interests. Save it. Brian, I've heard enough lies. Allison's composure cracked. You don't understand the financial pressure we've been under. Brian's company cut his salary by 30%. My business is barely breaking even, and we're drowning in debt from the renovations we've already done. This development deal would solve everything. By stealing my home, Margaret's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. By draining the retirement savings your father and I spent decades building, by putting me in a facility I don't need or want, it's a luxury senior community, Allison snapped. Do you know how much those waiting list deposits cost? We were trying to secure your future. No, you were securing yours, Margaret countered. At my expense. Brian stepped forward, his expression pleading. Mom, please, we can work this out. Yes, we made some mistakes, but we're family. Don't do something you'll regret. The only thing I regret, Margaret said softly, is not seeing who you've become sooner. She gathered the documents back into the folder. I've reported the fraud to the bank. I've frozen the accounts you've been draining. And tomorrow, I'm meeting with a real estate attorney to ensure you can't proceed with your development plans. You can't do this, Allison hissed. We've invested everything in this project. The investors are ready to move forward. They'll have to find another property to develop, Margaret said. This one isn't for sale. Brian's desperation was palpable. Mom, be reasonable. This house is worth a fortune now with the zoning changes. We could all benefit. I'm not interested in your version of benefit, Margaret cut him off. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more calls to make. She turned to leave, but Brian grabbed her arm. You can't just walk away from this. We need to talk. Margaret looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. We've done all the talking we need to for now. My next conversation will be with my lawyer. As she walked toward the guest house, she heard Allison's voice rise in panic. What are we going to tell the investors? They're expecting signed contracts next week. Margaret didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the question. Let them figure it out. She had her own plans to finalize. The first real gift Margaret had ever received from Robert was a small wooden box with her initials inlaid in mother of pearl. For keeping your treasures, he'd said, presenting it on their first anniversary. Over the years, it had held everything from love letters to baby teeth to the emergency cash they'd saved during leaner times. Now, sitting cross-legged on the guest house bed, Margaret opened that same box and carefully arranged its contents, the trust documents Robert had hidden away. The deed to the house, printouts of the fraudulent loan papers, and a small digital recorder, not Olivia's, but one Helen had suggested she keep with her at all times. The recorder had already proven its worth. That morning, after their confrontation, Margaret had captured Brian and Allison discussing their next steps while they thought she was out walking. We need to move faster, Allison's voice, tight with panic. If she's already talking to lawyers, I know, Brian, sounding defeated. But what can we do? She's frozen the accounts. There's still the trust fund, Allison insisted. Your dad's old Navy buddy mentioned it years ago. Remember? Said your dad set something up separate from the regular accounts? She must have found it by now. Even if she has, we don't have access to it, Brian countered. Not yet. Allison's voice lowered. But if we can convince a doctor she's not competent to manage her own affairs, adult protective services, guardianship. Margaret had felt physically ill listening to the recording. They weren't just after her house and retirement accounts. They were contemplating trying to have her declared incompetent to access Robert's trust. A knock at the guest house door jolted her from these dark thoughts. Margaret quickly closed the box and slid it under the bed before answering. Olivia stood on the threshold, clutching her backpack, eyes red from crying. "Grandma," she whispered, "can I stay with you tonight?" Margaret ushered her in immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "Mommy and Daddy are fighting again. Really loud." Olivia's lower lip trembled. "Daddy threw something and it broke. I got scared." Margaret's heart clenched. In all her focus on protecting herself, she hadn't fully considered how the situation was affecting Olivia. "You're safe here," she assured the child, helping her settle on the small sofa. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" Olivia nodded, then reached into her backpack and pulled out the voice recorder Margaret had given her. "I did what you asked," she said solemnly. "They were talking about you when they thought I was watching TV. It didn't sound nice." Margaret hesitated. Using her granddaughter this way felt wrong. Yet Olivia had already been caught in the crossfire whether she gathered evidence or not. "Thank you," she said finally, taking the recorder. "I'm sorry you had to hear unkind things. Are you really going to go away to that place in the Purple Book?" Olivia asked suddenly. "Mommy told Daddy they could still make you go, even if you don't want to." A chill ran through Margaret. "No, sweetheart, I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise." Margaret hugged her tightly. "Now, let me make that hot chocolate while you get into your pajamas. There's a spare toothbrush in the bathroom drawer." As Olivia disappeared into the bathroom, Margaret pressed play on the recorder, keeping the volume low. Allison's voice emerged, sharp with frustration. "The guardianship angle is our best shot now. We just need to document enough instances of her being confused or unsafe to build a case." Brian sounded uncertain. "I don't know. Al, that's taking it pretty far." "Do you have a better idea the development deal is falling apart? We've spent most of the loan already, and now she's frozen the accounts. We're on the verge of bankruptcy if we don't salvage something. Maybe we should just tell her the truth. Explain how bad things are financially. She might understand. Are you kidding after she went to the bank and accused us of fraud? She's declared war, Brian, and if we don't fight back, we lose everything." There was a pause. Then Brian's voice, defeated. "What do you need me to do? Call Dr. Phillips tomorrow. Tell him you're concerned about her cognitive state. Mention the bathroom fall. How she gets confused about where things are in the house. How she sometimes seems paranoid about us moving her things. But those things aren't true. They could be true. She's the right age for early dementia. And it would explain why she's suddenly acting so hostile and suspicious." The recording continued, but Margaret had heard enough. She switched it off as Olivia emerged from the bathroom in her pajamas, blissfully unaware of the conversation she had captured. As Margaret prepared hot chocolate, her mind raced. They were planning to have her declared incompetent to use her age against her, to twist normal reactions to their gaslighting into symptoms of cognitive decline. And based on Allison's tone, they weren't planning to wait. She needed to act immediately. While Olivia sipped her hot chocolate and chatted about school, Margaret sent a text to Helen Need to accelerate our plan. "They're planning to claim I'm incompetent. Call me first thing tomorrow." Helen's response came quickly. "On it, don't worry. They've just made a fatal mistake." Margaret tucked her phone away and focused on Olivia, pushing aside her fears for the moment. One problem at a time. Tonight, she needed to be a grandmother. Tomorrow, she would become a warrior. The first bombshell dropped 3 days later. Margaret sat in the office of Anthony Riviera, the forensic accountant Helen had recommended, reviewing the evidence they'd gathered, the forged loan documents, the unauthorized withdrawals from her retirement accounts, the paper trail showing exactly where the money had gone primarily to Allison's struggling marketing business and a series of contractors who had been renovating the main house. "It's clear cut," Riviera said, tapping the documents. "The electronic signature on the loan application doesn't match your verified signature pattern, and the IP address used to complete the application is registered to your son's work computer, not any device you own." "So the bank will reverse the loan?" Margaret asked hopefully. "Eventually, yes, but it won't be immediate. Legal proceedings like this take time." Helen, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Time is something Margaret doesn't have. Her son and daughter-in-law are already taking steps to have her declared incompetent." Riviera frowned. "That complicates things. If they succeed, even temporarily, they could gain control of her finances during the review period. Which is why we need to move faster," Helen insisted. "Is there any way to expedite this process?" Riviera considered for a moment. "There is one possibility. The loan officer who processed this application, James Wilson." "Any relation?" Margaret blinked in surprise. "My nephew, Robert's brother's son. I haven't seen him in years. But yes, he works in banking. That's a significant conflict of interest, Riviera said, his expression darkening. If he knowingly processed a loan application for a family member, especially one with a forged signature, that's not just fraud. It's a serious ethics violation that could cost him his license. Helen's eyes gleamed. And if we approach him directly with this information, he might be motivated to resolve the situation quickly and quietly, Riviera confirmed, especially if the alternative is a formal investigation that could end his career. Margaret felt uncomfortable. James is family. I don't want to threaten him. He participated in defrauding you, Helen pointed out gently. Family or not, he made his choice. We don't have to be adversarial, Riviera suggested. Just factual. Present the evidence, explain the consequences of a formal investigation, and offer a solution that protects everyone's interests, including his. Margaret nodded slowly. I suppose that's fair. What's our next step? I'll prepare a complete file documenting the fraud, Riviera said. Then we request a meeting with James private, off the record. We show him what we know and propose an expedited resolution, immediate cancellation of the loan, return of any fees or interest charged, and a formal acknowledgement that your signature was used without authorization. And if he refuses, Margaret asked, Riviera's expression hardened, then we escalate to his superiors, the banking commission, and potentially law enforcement, but I doubt it will come to that. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. As they left Riviera's office, Helen squeezed Margaret's arm encouragingly. This is good progress. The loan is the most urgent issue. It puts your house at risk. Once we've neutralized that threat, we can focus on recovering the stolen retirement funds. Margaret nodded, though her heart felt heavy. Every step forward in protecting herself seemed to drive the wedge between her and Brian deeper. Was there any coming back from this? Any possibility of reconciliation once the legal dust settled? She pushed the thought aside. Those were questions for another day. Right now, she needed to focus on securing her home and her future, the same home and future Brian and Allison had been willing to sacrifice for their own gain. The meeting with James Wilson took place in a private room at a downtown cafe neutral territory, as Helen had suggested. Margaret arrived first, settling into a corner booth with her back to the wall, a position that allowed her to see the entire space. Helen had coached her on projecting strength, on not showing the emotional turmoil that had kept her awake most nights. James arrived precisely on time, looking every bit the successful bank executive in his tailored suit and carefully knotted tie. But his face, so similar to Robert's in its underlying structure, showed the strain of someone who knew he'd been caught. Aunt Margaret, he said, sliding into the booth across from her. It's been a long time. Too long, she agreed, studying him. The boy who had once played in her backyard was now approaching 50, with silver at his temples and lines around his eyes. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. James glanced around the cafe nervously. Your message said this was urgent, family business. It is. Margaret opened the folder she'd brought and slid a document across the table. Do you recognize this loan application? James barely glanced at it. I process dozens of applications every week. I couldn't possibly. It's a home equity line of credit for $150,000 secured against my property at 247 Maple Street. Margaret interrupted. Processed and approved 3 months ago, with my electronic signature, which I never provided. James swallowed visibly. I'd need to check my records. You processed it personally, Margaret continued, despite knowing that the applicant was your aunt, creating a clear conflict of interest. And despite the fact that the application was submitted from Brian's work computer, not any device I own? The color drained from James's face. Margaret, did you know the signature was forged? She asked quietly. Did you know Brian was using my home as collateral without my knowledge or consent? James looked down at his hands. Brian said you had agreed to it, that you were helping them expand Allison's business and renovate the house. He said you just needed assistance with the paperwork. And you believed that without speaking to me directly? He's your son, James said weakly. I had no reason to doubt him. Margaret leaned forward. Let me be clear, James. I never authorized this loan. I never agreed to use my home as collateral for anything. And I certainly never signed these documents, electronically or otherwise. What do you want from me? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want the loan canceled, immediately. I want any fees or interest charged returned to me. And I want formal acknowledgement from the bank that this loan was processed fraudulently. James shook his head. I can't just cancel a loan that's already been disbursed. There are procedures, reviews. There are also banking regulations about conflicts of interest and fraud. Margaret cut in. Regulations that could cost you your license if an investigation were launched. Are you threatening me? James looked genuinely shocked. I'm stating facts, Margaret replied. I have a forensic accountant and a lawyer preparing formal complaints right now, but I prefer to resolve this quietly, without damaging your career or the family name any further. James was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he sighed, I can initiate an internal fraud review, flag the loan for expedited cancellation due to identity theft. It would still take a week or two, but it's the fastest option. And the fees and interest, I can probably get those waived as part of the fraud resolution. What about a formal acknowledgement of fraud? Margaret pressed. James hesitated. That's trickier. The bank won't want to admit liability in writing, but I can make sure the loan is removed from your credit report with a notation that it was opened fraudulently. Margaret considered this. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it addressed the most urgent issue, removing the claim against her home. She nodded slowly. Acceptable. I want this process started today. I'll need to go back to the office to initiate it, James said, standing. He paused, looking genuinely regretful. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have verified with you directly before processing anything. Yes, you should have, Margaret agreed. Family isn't an excuse to ignore proper procedures. James, it's a reason to be more careful, not less. As James turned to leave, Margaret called after him. One more thing. Brian and Allison don't know about this meeting. I prefer to keep it that way for now. James nodded, understanding the implicit message. The cousins had been close once, but today James had chosen sides, and it wasn't with Brian. After he left, Margaret sat alone in the booth for several minutes, feeling drained but satisfied. The first piece of her plan was falling into place. The loan would be canceled, removing the immediate threat to her home. Now she needed to address the stolen retirement funds and, most urgently, Brian and Allison's plan to have her declared incompetent. She reached for her phone to update Helen, then hesitated as a new text message appeared on the screen. Mom, we need to talk. Dr. Phillips has an opening tomorrow at 3 p.m. I've scheduled a cognitive assessment for you. This is for your own good. I'll drive you. The trap was closing faster than she'd anticipated. If she refused the appointment, they would use it as evidence of her being difficult or resistant to help. If she went, they would potentially have a doctor's assessment they could twist to support their guardianship petition. Margaret took a deep breath and texted Helen. They've scheduled a doctor's appointment to evaluate my cognitive state, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Helen's response was immediate, don't go. I'm calling Dr. Ramirez right now. She can see you today for an independent assessment. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. Margaret gathered her things quickly, a new sense of urgency propelling her. The cafe suddenly felt exposed, as if Brian or Allison might appear at any moment. She needed to move faster, to stay one step ahead of their machinations. As she stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, Margaret straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. They thought she was easy prey, a confused old woman they could manipulate and discard. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. Dr. Elena Ramirez's office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture that put Margaret immediately at ease. The geriatric specialist had agreed to see her on short notice as a favor to Helen, who had apparently represented the doctor's mother in a similar situation years earlier. Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Ramirez said, reviewing the notes in front of her. Helen has explained the situation, but I'd like to hear it from you as well. Your son and daughter-in-law are attempting to have you declared incompetent. Margaret nodded. They've scheduled a cognitive assessment with their doctor for tomorrow. I believe they're planning to use it to petition for guardianship so they can access my finances and sell my home. Dr. Ramirez's expression was professionally neutral, but her eyes flashed with something like anger. And you're here for an independent assessment to counter their claims. Yes, I need documentation that I'm fully competent to manage my own affairs. I understand. Dr. Ramirez set aside her notes. We'll do a comprehensive evaluation today. It will include standard cognitive assessments, memory tests, judgment evaluations, and a thorough review of your medical history. The process takes about 2 hours. Are you comfortable with that? Margaret nodded. Whatever it takes. The assessment was thorough, but not difficult. Margaret answered questions about current events, solved math problems, recalled lists of words, explained how she would handle various scenarios, and discussed her daily routines in detail. Dr. Ramirez was professional and kind throughout, giving no indication of how Margaret was performing. Finally, after nearly 2.5 hours, Dr. Ramirez set down her clipboard and smiled. Mrs. Wilson, I can state unequivocally that you are of sound mind and fully competent to manage your own affairs. Your cognitive function is excellent for any age, and your decision-making capacity is intact. In fact, your scores on several assessments are above average for your age group. Relief washed over Margaret. So, if they tried a petition for guardianship, they would face an uphill battle. Dr. Ramirez confirmed. I'll prepare a comprehensive report documenting your cognitive status, which you can provide to the court if necessary. I'm also willing to testify on your behalf, should it come to that. Thank you, Margaret said sincerely. You have no idea what a relief this is. Dr. Ramirez's expression softened. Unfortunately, I do know. I see cases like yours more often than I'd like capable older adults whose families try to seize control of their assets under the guise of protection. It's a form of elder abuse that doesn't get enough attention. Elder abuse? Margaret repeated, the words landing like stones. I never thought I'd be a victim of that. Most people don't, Dr. Ramirez said gently, especially when the perpetrators are family members they trust. But recognizing it for what it is can be empowering. It helps you understand that you're not overreacting by protecting yourself. Margaret nodded, feeling an odd mixture of validation and sadness. Dr. Ramirez was right. Naming what was happening helped clarify her path forward. This wasn't just a family disagreement or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to strip her of her autonomy and assets. What should I do about tomorrow's appointment? She asked. The one my son scheduled, don't attend, Dr. Ramirez advised firmly. Send a certified letter to the doctor's office stating that you did not schedule this appointment, did not consent to it, and have obtained an independent assessment from me. Copy your attorney on the letter and include my contact information. Won't that make Brian angry? Probably, Dr. Ramirez acknowledged. But it will also create a paper trail showing that you're actively protecting your interests, which undermines any claim that you're unable to advocate for yourself. As Margaret left the office with a preliminary letter from Dr. Ramirez and the promise of a full report within days, she felt more confident than she had in weeks. She had medical documentation of her competence. The fraudulent loan was being addressed. The pieces were falling into place. Now she needed to secure Robert's trust and develop a long-term plan for the house, one that would protect her interests while still acknowledging the complicated reality that Brian was her only child. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to cut him out completely. Not yet, anyway. Helen's living room had become their unofficial war room, with documents spread across her dining table and legal pads filled with notes and strategy points. Samuel Green had joined them, bringing his judicial experience and calm, analytical approach to the situation. The trust is the key, Samuel said, reviewing the documents Robert had left for Margaret. It's completely separate from your other assets, established in a different bank, with you as the sole beneficiary and trustee. Brian has no claim to it whatsoever. And the house, Margaret asked. The deed is solely in your name, Helen confirmed. But given their actions so far, we should assume they'll try other angles to gain control of it. They've already shown they're willing to forge documents. What about a restraining order? Samuel suggested. Given the evidence of financial abuse and their attempts to have you declared incompetent? Margaret shook her head firmly. I don't want to go that far. Despite everything, Brian is still my son, and Olivia, I can't cut myself off from my granddaughter. Understandable, Samuel said, but we need some legal mechanism to prevent them from continuing to exploit you. Helen tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. What about a modified restraining order not preventing contact, but specifically prohibiting financial transactions or decisions regarding Margaret's property without her explicit, notarized consent? That could work, Samuel agreed. It would create a legal barrier without completely severing family ties. And the trust, Margaret asked. How do we ensure they can't access it, even if they somehow convince a judge to grant them temporary guardianship? The trust already has protections built in, Helen pointed out. Robert specified that control would transfer to an independent trustee, the bank's trust department, if you were ever declared incompetent. And that trustee would be bound by the trust's terms, which explicitly prohibit selling the house without your consent. Robert thought of everything, Margaret murmured, a fresh wave of gratitude washing over her. He certainly tried, Samuel agreed, but we should still move the trust to a different bank, one where James Wilson doesn't work and where Brian has no connections. Helen nodded. I've already contacted Northern Trust. They have an excellent reputation for managing family trusts, and they have no relationship with First National, where the fraudulent loan was processed. Margaret looked at the array of documents, plans, and strategies spread before them. It was overwhelming, but also reassuring. She had a team now, professionals and friends who understood what was happening and were helping her fight back. What about the house itself? She asked. Even if we secure it legally, I'm not sure I want to keep living there with Brian and Allison. The atmosphere is toxic. You could sell it, Samuel suggested. Use the proceeds to buy something smaller, more manageable, and put the rest in the trust. Margaret shook her head. That feels like letting them win. Besides, the house has meaning beyond its financial value. Robert and I built our life there. What about subdividing the property? Helen suggested suddenly. The guest house is already essentially a separate residence. You could legally split the lot, keep the guest house portion for yourself, and sell the main house but on your terms, not theirs. The idea struck Margaret with unexpected force. It was elegant in its simplicity and justice. She would retain part of the property, the part she'd already been relegated to, while removing Brian and Allison's access to the main house they'd been so eager to demolish. Could that work? She asked, looking between Helen and Samuel. It would require zoning approval, Samuel said, considering. But given the size of your lot and the fact that the guest house already exists as a separate structure with its own utilities, it's certainly possible. And it would put you in control of the process, Helen added. Rather than being pushed out of your home, you'd be choosing to reconfigure it on your own terms. Margaret felt the first stirrings of real hope. Let's look into it. If it's feasible, it might be the perfect solution. As they continued planning late into the evening, Margaret's phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from Brian, growing increasingly urgent. Mom, where are you? We need to talk about tomorrow's appointment. Mom, please respond. I'm worried about you. If you don't come home soon, we'll have to file a missing persons report. This behavior is concerning. The last message made her blood run cold. They were already building their case, documenting what they would characterize as erratic behavior. Every unanswered text, every night spent away from home, would become evidence in their narrative of her declining competence. I need to go back, she said, showing Helen the messages. If I stay away, they'll use it against me. Helen frowned. It's risky. They know you're onto them now. I know, but I can't give them ammunition for their guardianship petition. And Olivia, she'll be worried if I don't come home. Samuel leaned forward. If you do go back, you need protection. Documentation of everything that happens. Record conversations if you legally can. Keep a detailed journal. And don't be alone with them if possible. Margaret nodded. I'll be careful, and I'll have the voice recorder with me at all times. As Helen drove her home, Margaret steeled herself for the confrontation she knew was coming. Brian would demand explanations about the frozen accounts, the canceled doctor's appointment, her whereabouts today. She would need to navigate carefully, revealing enough to establish boundaries, but not so much that they could anticipate her next moves. The house was lit up when they arrived, Brian's silhouette visible through the front window. Helen squeezed Margaret's hand. Call me if anything happens, she said. Anything at all. Samuel and I can be here in minutes. Margaret nodded, grateful for her friend's support. I will, and thank you for everything. As she walked up the path to the house she had owned for 30 years, but now approached like a battleground, Margaret straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity and strength. Robert would have expected nothing less. Where have you been? Brian demanded the moment Margaret stepped through the door. We've been worried sick. Margaret set her purse down calmly, making sure the voice recorder inside was activated. I was with Helen. I needed some time to process everything that's been happening. You could have called, Brian insisted. I've been texting you all day. I needed space. Brian, surely you can understand that, given the circumstances. Allison appeared from the kitchen, her expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. We've been so worried, Margaret, especially with the confusion you've been experiencing lately. I'm not confused about anything, Margaret replied evenly. I'm quite clear on what's been happening in this house. What's that supposed to mean? Brian asked, his tone defensive. It means I know about the fraudulent loan, the drained retirement accounts, and your plans to sell this property to developers? Margaret kept her voice calm, but firm. I know everything, Brian. Allison's mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of panic before she recovered. I told you she's been having these paranoid episodes. Brian, this is exactly why we scheduled that assessment. It's not paranoia when there's evidence, Margaret countered. The loan has already been flagged as fraudulent. By the way, it's being canceled as we speak. The color drained from Brian's face. You went to the bank behind my back. You took out a loan against my house without my knowledge or consent, Margaret reminded him. You forged my signature. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? We were trying to help you, Allison interjected. This house is too big, too much responsibility. We were going to use part of the money to secure you a wonderful place at Harmony Pines, a place I never asked for or wanted, Margaret pointed out. And what about the rest of the money, the part that went to your business? Allison, the part that paid for your renovations and new furniture? Brian stepped forward, his expression pleading. Mom, you don't understand the financial pressure we've been under. My salary was cut. Allison's business is struggling. So you decided to steal from me? Margaret asked quietly. From your own mother. We didn't steal, Allison snapped. We were restructuring family assets to benefit everyone. The development deal would have given us all financial security. Margaret turned to her directly. The development deal that involved demolishing my home of 30 years without my knowledge or consent? The one you were planning while telling me I was confused and needed to be in assisted living. You're twisting everything, Allison insisted. Brian, tell her she's being ridiculous. But Brian's certainty seemed to be wavering. He looked between his wife and his mother, conflict evident in his expression. Mom, I never meant for things to go this far. It started small, just borrowing a little from your accounts when we were short on the mortgage. Then Allison's business needed capital, and the opportunity with the developers came up. It just snowballed. Snowballed into fraud and elder abuse, Margaret said flatly. Elder abuse, Allison scoffed. Don't be dramatic. We were trying to help you. By gaslighting me, making me think I was losing my memory and competence, taking my belongings and restricting my access to my own home? Margaret shook her head. That's textbook elder abuse, Allison. Look it up. A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Brian spoke, his voice subdued. What happens now? That depends, Margaret said. I've taken steps to protect myself legally and financially. The loan is being canceled, my accounts are secured, and I've had an independent cognitive assessment that confirms I'm fully competent to manage my own affairs. Allison's eyes widened. You what? You heard me. So your plan to have me declared incompetent won't work. Margaret held Allison's gaze steadily. The question is, where do we go from here? Brian ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. What do you want, Mom? I want my home and my finances respected. I want acknowledgement of the harm you've caused. And I want a plan for moving forward that protects everyone's interests, including Olivia's. And if we refuse, Allison challenged, then I'll pursue all legal remedies available to me, Margaret said simply, including criminal charges for fraud and financial elder abuse. The threat hung in the air between them. Brian looked stricken, but Allison's expression had hardened into something calculating. You wouldn't press charges against your own son, she said. You're bluffing. Try me, Margaret replied, her voice steady. I've already filed preliminary reports with the bank and the police. All it takes is one call to move forward with formal charges. Before Allison could respond, the sound of small footsteps on the stairs drew their attention. Olivia stood on the landing in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Grandma, she exclaimed, running down the remaining steps and throwing her arms around Margaret's waist. You came back. I was scared you left forever. Margaret hugged her granddaughter tightly, her resolve strengthening. This child who loved her unconditionally was worth fighting for, even if it meant difficult confrontations with Brian and Allison. I would never leave without saying goodbye, sweetheart, she assured Olivia. I just needed some time with my friend Helen. Are you staying in the guest house tonight? Olivia asked hopefully. Can I sleep over there with you again? Margaret glanced at Brian and Allison, a silent challenge in her eyes. Neither objected. Of course you can, she told Olivia. Go get your pillow and toothbrush, and I'll meet you there in a few minutes. As Olivia scampered back upstairs, Margaret turned to Brian and Allison one last time. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. I suggest you think carefully about your options. Because I assure you, I'm not bluffing. She walked out the door with her head high, leaving them standing in the living room of a house they had tried to steal but would never truly own. Olivia's innocent question over breakfast in the guest house caught Margaret off guard. Grandma, why does Mommy want to record you doing bad things? Margaret nearly choked on her toast. What do you mean, sweetie? Olivia poured more syrup on her pancakes, real ones, made with buttermilk the way she liked. I heard Mommy telling Daddy they need to get videos of you being something. Confused, Margaret suggested, her heart racing. Yeah, she said they need videos of you being confused or unsafe to show the judge. What judge? Grandma? Are you in trouble? Margaret set down her coffee, fighting to keep her expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble. Your mom and dad and I just have some grown-up disagreements we're working through. About the house, Olivia asked innocently. Mommy told her friend on the phone that you're being stubborn about the house and they might have to do something drastic. Something drastic. The word sent a chill down Margaret's spine. She had been naive to think the confrontation last night would make them back down. Instead, they were escalating planning to gather evidence of her supposed incompetence for a judge. Olivia, when did you hear Mommy say these things? This morning, when you were in the shower. She was talking really quiet on the phone in the kitchen. Olivia looked up, concern in her young eyes. Are you mad at Mommy and Daddy? Not mad, exactly, Margaret said carefully. Just disappointed in some choices they've made. Like when I'm disappointed when Jimmy breaks the class rules and gets us all in trouble. Margaret smiled despite the situation. Something like that? Yes. After breakfast, when Olivia was absorbed in drawing at the small table by the window, Margaret texted Helen urgent. Need to talk. They're planning to record me in compromising situations for guardianship petition. Helen's response was immediate. Get out of there now. Bring Olivia if possible. Coming to pick you up. Margaret hesitated. Taking Olivia without Brian and Allison's permission could backfire badly, but leaving her behind meant returning to the house later, potentially walking into whatever drastic measures they were planning. Before she could decide, another text came through at minimum. Secure all your important documents and medications. They may try to hide things to make you appear confused or create unsafe situations. That much she could do immediately. Margaret gathered the wooden box containing Robert's trust documents, her own medical records, and the recordings she collected. She added her medications, phone charger, and a change of clothes, packing everything into a small overnight bag. Are we going somewhere? Olivia asked, looking up from her drawing. I might need to stay with Helen for a little while, Margaret explained. Would you be okay with that? You could come visit after school? Olivia's face fell. I want to stay with you. I know, sweetie, but you have school, and your mom and dad, they're being mean to you. Olivia interrupted with a blunt perception of a child. I heard them. Daddy said they might have to trick you. Margaret's blood ran cold. Trick me how? Olivia shrugged. I don't know, but it sounded bad. She abandoned her drawing and came to stand beside Margaret. Can't I come with you to Helen's? Please, I'm scared to stay here without you. The raw honesty in her granddaughter's voice broke Margaret's heart. Olivia wasn't just worried about her grandmother. She was frightened by what she was witnessing in her own home. Let me call Helen, Margaret said, making a decision. We'll figure something out, Helen answered on the first ring. I'm 5 minutes away. What's the situation? Olivia's heard them planning something she says they want to trick me, and she's asking to come with me. She's scared, Helen. There was a brief silence on the other end. That complicates things legally, Helen said finally. Taking her without their permission could be seen as kidnapping, even though you're her grandmother. I know, but I can't just leave her here, not when she's explicitly asking for help. Does she have a phone? Could she call you if anything happens? No, Brian and Allison think she's too young. Margaret glanced at Olivia, who was watching her with worried eyes. Helen, I don't know what to do. Here's what we'll do, Helen said decisively. I'll pick you both up. We'll take Olivia to school as normal. Then you'll come stay with me while we expedite the legal protections we discussed yesterday. If they want to claim you took Olivia inappropriately, they'll have to explain why you, the supposedly confused grandmother, were the one ensuring she got to school on time. The plan made sense. It would get Margaret out of the house temporarily without creating a legal issue around Olivia. Okay, she agreed. We'll be ready in 5 minutes. As they gathered Olivia's school things, Margaret noticed a small device partially hidden behind a decorative candle on the bookshelf, a tiny camera. Its lens aimed directly at the seating area where she usually read or watched television. The evidence gathering had already begun. She left it in place, not wanting to alert Brian and Allison that she discovered their surveillance. Instead, she made a mental note to have the guest house swept for recording devices once she returned. Helen arrived minutes later, her car idling in the driveway. Margaret helped Olivia with her backpack and locked the guest house behind them. As they walked to the car, the front door of the main house opened, and Allison emerged, her expression a mixture of surprise and anger. Where are you going? She demanded. Olivia has school. That's exactly where we're taking her, Margaret replied calmly. Helen offered to drive us. Us, Allison's eyes narrowed. You don't need to go to Olivia's school. I'm helping with the second-grade reading program today. Margaret improvised smoothly. I signed up last month. Remember? It's on the calendar. It wasn't, of course, but Allison couldn't challenge the claim without admitting she hadn't been paying attention to Olivia's school activities. Fine, Allison said tightly. But I expect you both home directly after school? Margaret smiled pleasantly. We'll see you later. Allison, have a good day. As they drove away, Olivia waved to her mother through the window, then turned to Margaret with a conspiratorial smile. You're not really helping with reading today, are you, Grandma? No, sweetheart. That was a creative explanation. You mean a lie, Olivia said matter-of-factly. Mommy and Daddy lie a lot lately. They told me you're sick in your brain, but you don't seem sick to me. Margaret exchanged a glance with Helen in the rearview mirror. I'm not sick. Olivia, sometimes grown-ups see things differently, and that can lead to misunderstandings. Big misunderstandings, Olivia agreed solemnly. Like when Mommy said they might have to put medicine in your tea to make you sleepy for the doctor. That seems really wrong. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. When did she say that? Yesterday. She told Daddy it would be easier if you were calmer for the assessment. Olivia looked up at Margaret with worried eyes. I wasn't supposed to hear. I was supposed to be watching my show, but I was getting a snack. Helen's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. That's not a misunderstanding. Margaret, that's a criminal conspiracy to drug you without consent. I know, Margaret said quietly, trying to process the revelation. They had been planning to sedate her for the doctor's appointment, to literally drug her into appearing confused and incompetent. The betrayal went beyond financial exploitation into something truly sinister. We need to record Olivia's statement, Helen said, legally, carefully, with proper documentation. This changes everything. Margaret nodded, still stunned by how far Brian and Allison had been willing to go. After we drop her at school? No, Olivia said suddenly, her small voice firm. I want to help Grandma. I can tell people what I heard. I'm not a baby. Margaret turned to her granddaughter, seeing the determination in her young face. Olivia, this is very serious grown-up business. Are you sure? Olivia nodded. Mommy and Daddy are being bad. Not like normal bad, like when they say no dessert. Really bad. I want to help make it stop. Helen caught Margaret's eye in the mirror again. 7-year-olds can be credible witnesses if interviewed properly, and her testimony about overhearing their plans will be powerful evidence. What about school? Margaret asked. One day won't hurt? Helen decided. We'll call in sick and take her directly to my colleague who specializes in forensic interviews of children. He can document her statement in a way that will hold up in court if needed. As they changed direction, heading toward Helen's office instead of Olivia's school, Margaret felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude for her granddaughter's loyalty, heartbreak that the child was being drawn into this ugly situation, and a growing cold anger toward Brian and Allison. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, not just with her, but with their own daughter. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the way things were before. The family was fractured, perhaps irreparably, but at least now, with Olivia's testimony, Margaret had a chance to protect both herself and her granddaughter from whatever drastic measures Brian and Allison had been planning. The forensic interview was gentle but thorough. Dr. Michael Chen, a child psychologist who frequently worked with the courts, spoke with Olivia in a comfortable room designed to put children at ease. Margaret watched through a one-way window, her heart breaking as her granddaughter matter-of-factly described the conversations she'd overheard. Mommy said they needed to get videos of Grandma looking confused, Olivia explained, drawing pictures as she talked. She said they put cameras in the guest house to catch her doing weird things. And what about the medicine you mentioned? Dr. Chen asked. Oh, that was yesterday, Olivia said. Mommy told Daddy they should put something in Grandma's tea before the doctor appointment to make her sleepy and confused. She said it wouldn't hurt her, just make her seem more, I don't remember the word. Impaired, Dr. Chen suggested. Yeah, that's it. Olivia looked up from her drawing. Mommy said it would make the doctor believe them about Grandma needing to go to the special home. Dr. Chen kept his expression neutral, but Margaret could see the concern in his eyes. Did they say what medicine they were going to use? Olivia shook her head. No, but Daddy didn't like the idea. He said it was going too far. Then they started fighting, and I went back to my room. After the interview, Dr. Chen met with Margaret and Helen in his office, his expression grave. Olivia's testimony is consistent and credible, he said. She's describing what she heard without embellishment or obvious coaching, and what she's describing, surveillance without consent, and a plan to administer sedatives without knowledge, goes well beyond financial exploitation into potentially criminal territory. What should we do? Margaret asked. File for an emergency protective order immediately, Dr. Chen advised. Based on Olivia's testimony and the financial evidence you've gathered, You have grounds for protection from both financial exploitation and physical endangerment. And Olivia, Margaret's voice cracked slightly. She can't go back there if they're willing to do something like this. Dr. Chen's expression softened. That's more complicated. As her grandmother, you don't have automatic standing for custody unless there's clear evidence of abuse or neglect directed at Olivia herself. They were planning to drug her grandmother in front of her, Helen pointed out. That's psychological abuse of the child, exposing her to criminal behavior. Possibly, Dr. Chen acknowledged, but the courts move slowly in custody matters, even temporary ones. The immediate priority is securing Margaret's safety and preventing them from moving forward with their guardianship petition. Margaret felt torn. The thought of Olivia returning to that house, to parents who were plotting such disturbing actions, was unbearable, but legally kidnapping her granddaughter would only complicate an already volatile situation. What if Olivia refuses to go home? She asked. She's already said she's afraid. If she expresses that fear to a mandatory reporter like myself or school officials, it would trigger an investigation by Child Protective Services, Dr. Chen explained. That could potentially result in temporary placement with you as a family member, but it's not guaranteed. Helen leaned forward. Let's focus on what we can control right now. We'll file for the emergency protective order for Margaret immediately. Then we'll seek an emergency hearing regarding Olivia, citing her testimony and expressed fears. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll provide my professional assessment supporting both actions. And I'll notify Child Protective Services of Olivia's disclosures, which will initiate their process. As they left Dr. Chen's office, Margaret felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. They had a plan and growing evidence, but they were also racing against time. Brian and Allison would soon realize that Olivia hadn't gone to school and that Margaret hadn't returned home. Their drastic measures might accelerate. Where do we go now? She asked Helen as they rejoined Olivia in the waiting room. To the courthouse, Helen said decisively. We file everything immediately, and then to my house, where you'll both stay until the emergency hearing. I've already asked Samuel to meet us there. He has connections with several judges who might expedite our case. Olivia took Margaret's hand as they walked to the car, her small fingers warm and trusting. Are we going to be okay? Grandma? Margaret squeezed her hand gently. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. We have good people helping us. As Helen drove toward the courthouse, Margaret's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Brian, each more frantic than the last. Mom, where are you? Olivia's school called saying she's absent. Mom, this is serious. If you've taken Olivia without permission, that's kidnapping. We're calling the police if you don't respond immediately. Margaret showed the messages to Helen, who grimaced. They're trying to flip the script painting you as the unstable one who's taken a child inappropriately. Respond once, factually. So there's a record. Margaret typed carefully. Olivia is safe with me. We're meeting with professionals regarding concerns she raised about her safety at home. We'll contact you through legal representatives soon. She hit send, then turned off her phone completely. Whatever happened next would play out in courtrooms and legal offices, not via text messages and accusations. She had crossed her own Rubicon, moving from defensive protection to active legal countermeasures. As the courthouse came into view, its imposing stone facade gleaming in the midday sun, Margaret felt a curious sense of calm settle over her. For weeks, she had been reacting to Brian and Allison's machinations, always one step behind their schemes. Now, finally, she was taking control of the narrative and with Olivia's unexpected help, changing the course of this painful family drama. Robert would be proud, she thought, not of the circumstances, certainly, but of her refusal to be victimized, her determination to protect not just herself, but also their granddaughter. He had prepared her for this battle without either of them knowing it would come. Now it was up to her to finish it. The emergency protective order was granted by late afternoon. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, had reviewed the evidence, the financial documentation, Dr. Ramirez's cognitive assessment, Dr. Chen's report of Olivia's testimony, and the recordings Margaret had collected, and rendered her decision without hesitation. Based on the credible threat of both financial exploitation and physical endangerment, this court grants an emergency protective order prohibiting Brian and Allison Wilson from contacting Margaret Wilson, entering her residence, or making any financial or medical decisions on her behalf. Judge Hernandez declared, this order will remain in effect pending a full hearing scheduled for 2 weeks from today. The matter of Olivia was more complicated. Without a direct accusation of abuse against Olivia herself, the judge was reluctant to issue an emergency custody order. However, She did authorize a child welfare investigation and temporary placement with Margaret under Helen's supervision until the situation could be more thoroughly evaluated. This is not a custody determination, Judge Hernandez emphasized. It is a temporary safety measure based on concerning testimony from the child. The parents will have supervised visitation rights, and family services will conduct a home assessment before any final decisions are made. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to ensure both Margaret and Olivia's immediate safety. As they left the courthouse, Samuel met them with news of his own. "I've spoken with the zoning board," he said, falling into step beside them. "Given the circumstances, they're expediting your application to subdivide the property. The guest house and surrounding quarter acre can be legally separated from the main house within days rather than weeks." Margaret looked at him in surprise. "How did you manage that?" Samuel's eyes twinkled. "Let's just say I still have some influence with local officials. And when I explained the situation, a widow being pushed out of her home by exploitative family members, they were eager to help. Once the property is subdivided," Helen added, "we can move forward with the next phase of the plan. The trust Robert established gives you options that Brian and Allison never anticipated." Margaret nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope despite the weight of the day's events. The legal protections were falling into place. The subdivision would secure her physical home, and most importantly, Olivia was safe at her side, at least for now. "What happens when Brian and Allison are served with the protective order?" she asked. "They'll be angry," Helen acknowledged. "They'll probably try to challenge it, claim you're the one who's unstable, that you've manipulated Olivia. But the evidence is overwhelmingly against them, especially with the financial fraud already documented by the bank. And Olivia's testimony is compelling," Samuel added. "Children that age don't fabricate detailed conversations about drugging tea or installing hidden cameras. The judge saw that immediately." Margaret glanced at Olivia, who was sitting quietly in Helen's living room, drawing pictures with the colored pencils Samuel had brought for her. Despite everything, the child seemed remarkably resilient, concerned, but not traumatized, aware that serious things were happening, but trusting that the adults around her would sort them out. "What do we tell her about all this?" Margaret asked softly. "The truth, but in age-appropriate terms," Helen advised. "That her parents made some serious mistakes, that everyone is working to fix the situation, and that she's not responsible for any of it. And that she was brave to speak up," Samuel added. "That part's important. She needs to know she did the right thing by telling you what she overheard." Margaret nodded, then joined Olivia on the couch. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" Olivia held up her picture, a simple but recognizable rendering of the guest house, surrounded by flowers and trees, with two stick figures standing outside. "It's us," she explained. "In our house. The small one, not the big one where Mommy and Daddy are." "Our house," Margaret repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Can we stay there, just us?" Olivia asked, her expression hopeful. "I don't want to live in the big house anymore. It doesn't feel happy." Margaret brushed a strand of hair from Olivia's forehead. "We're working on that, sweetheart. It's complicated grown-up stuff, but we're trying to make it possible." "Good," Olivia said decisively, returning to her drawing. "Because the big house is where all the fighting happens. The small house is peaceful." Out of the mouths of babes, Margaret thought again. Olivia had articulated exactly what Margaret herself had been feeling, that the main house, once a sanctuary, had become a battleground, while the guest house, despite being her exile, had become a refuge. Perhaps that was the answer all along, not fighting to reclaim the main house, but embracing the smaller space that already felt like home. The guest house, properly subdivided and legally protected, could be their fresh start, a place untainted by betrayal and manipulation. With renewed determination, Margaret rejoined Helen and Samuel in the kitchen, where they were reviewing legal documents. "I've made a decision," she announced. "Once the property is subdivided, I want to sell the main house, but not to developers, and not for Brian and Allison's benefit." Helen looked up. "What do you have in mind?" "Robert always talked about giving back to the community," Margaret explained. "He believed in creating spaces where people could thrive. What if we used the trust to purchase the main house from me at fair market value, then converted it into affordable housing for retired teachers?" Samuel's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious, but potentially doable, given the size of the trust and the structure of the property." "Robert's trust specifically allows for charitable uses," Helen noted, flipping through the documents. "And as the trustee, you have broad discretion in how the assets are invested." "It would solve multiple problems at once," Margaret continued, warming to the idea. "I'd receive fair value for the main house, which would provide financial security for Olivia and me. The house would be preserved rather than demolished for townhomes, and most importantly, it would honor Robert's memory by creating something meaningful from this painful situation. What about Brian and Allison? Samuel asked gently. This would effectively evict them. Margaret sighed. They forfeited any claim to consideration by their actions, but I'm not heartless. The proceeds from the sale would allow me to help them relocate conditionally, with strict oversight to ensure the money isn't misused. And if they fight it, Helen pressed. They can try, Margaret said firmly. But with the protective order, the documented fraud, and the property subdivision, they have very little legal ground to stand on. Their options are to accept my terms or face potential criminal charges for what they've done. Samuel nodded slowly. It's elegant, I'll give you that. Transforming a family crisis into a community asset while securing your own future. Robert would have approved. He would have done the same, Margaret said softly. He always saw opportunities where others saw only problems. As they began sketching out the details of this new plan, the legal structure, the financing, the timeline, Margaret felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since discovering Brian's betrayal, she was looking forward rather than backward, creating rather than merely defending. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, emotional confrontations, and complex negotiations. Brian and Allison would not surrender gracefully. That much was certain. But Margaret was no longer fighting just to keep what was hers. She was fighting to build something new and meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. And with Olivia's drawing of our house as inspiration, she finally had a vision worth fighting for. They say a house is made of walls and beams, but a home is built with love and dreams. Margaret Wilson had lost the house she'd shared with Robert, the kitchen where she taught Brian to bake, the living room where Olivia had taken her first steps. But sitting on the porch of the guest house, her house now, watching retired teachers tend the community garden where her roses once bloomed, she realized she gained something far more valuable than square footage. The courtroom battles had faded into memory. Brian had eventually found his way back to her, humbled and seeking forgiveness. Though the journey toward healing remained long and uncertain, Allison had moved away, their relationship a casualty of choices that couldn't be undone. But Olivia spent weekends in the small cottage, helping Margaret plant new roses, different varieties for different memories they were making together. The trust Robert had hidden away hadn't just secured Margaret's financial future, it had created a legacy neither of them could have imagined. Where one family had fractured, a community had formed. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the main house glowed with the lights of its new inhabitants, Margaret would sit with Robert's photograph and wonder, when did strength become our greatest inheritance, and how many others are silently fighting battles behind the doors of homes that no longer welcome them?